We'll just wait a moment. Things will populate. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Today is September 18th, 2025, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong-Matan. By way of a little background, the project was started about 5 years ago during the COVID pandemic as a way to build community among mediators, lawyers, and everyone who negotiates. And it was also designed as a resource to support the food banks that were overwhelmed with need and demand at the time. As a result of your generous participation, we have continued with this project, and we're very happy to have everyone here today. There's no charge, as you know, for these amazing programs. Instead, what we do is ask you to volunteer to a food bank designated by our speaker to support our mission to fight hunger if you are so inclined and so able. And as well, we ask you to please let us know in the chat if you have made these types of donations today so we can keep track as part of our running total. Today, our fearless co-host and moderator, Jeff Kitchaven, is unable to be with us today because he's on an airplane, but he sends his regards. And as he often says, week to week, one of his favorite parts of the program is asking for the running tally in terms of how much we have raised today. So Jean Lawler, will you please do the honors?
Always a pleasure. Well, so far, donations to food banks, of which we've been told, we should probably take bets here on who thinks it might be what, but we're up to $875,417.84. I mean, that's just amazing. We're getting to that $1 million mark sooner than later. So thank you so much, and so glad to have 74 people here so far. So today, thank you very much. Great program we'll have.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean, and thank you very much to our generous audience. We have a fantastic program today. The title is How to Negotiate Like the Adult You Want to Be. Our speaker is Professor Andrea Schneider from the Cardozo Law School. And her background and her bio are really just extraordinary, and it's a real privilege to have her with us today. Professor Schneider is the professor of law and director of the Kukin, did I pronounce that correctly, Andrea?
You did.
Kukin, thank you. Kukin Program for Conflict Resolution at the Cardozo School of Law in New York City. Professor Schneider was the previous director of the nationally ranked ADR program at Marquette University Law School in Wisconsin, where she taught ADR, negotiation, ethics, and international conflict resolution over 2 decades. In addition to overseeing the ADR program, Professor Schneider was also the inaugural director of the university's Institute for Women Leadership. In 2024, Professor Schneider was awarded the Rubin Theory to Practice Award given by the International Association of Conflict Management, honoring her meritorious and long-standing contributions at the nexus of theory, research, and practice as well. She was named the 2017 recipient of the ABA Section of Dispute Resolution Award for Outstanding Scholarly Work, which is the highest scholarly award given by the ABA in the field of dispute resolution. And in 2009, Professor Schneider was awarded the Woman of the Year Award by the Wisconsin Law Journal and Association for Women Lawyers. She was elected to the American Law Institute in 2022, as well as the Council for Foreign Relations in 2023. In addition to receiving these,
enough, David.
I'll give you one more. I'll do one more for you. She is the founding editor of Indisputably. It's a blog for ADR law faculty, and she started the Dispute Resolution Works in Progress annual conferences in 2007. She's given TED Talks. She graduated cum laude from Princeton University. She went to Harvard Law School, and she also received a diploma from the Academy of European Law in Florence, Italy. So obviously a fantastic background, a unique insight. And we're very honored to have her here today. The food bank that Professor Schneider has designated is called Upward New York. And with that, Professor Schneider, I'll hand you the floor and ask you to tell us a little bit about the organization.
It's great. Thank you so much. As I was mentioning to David, I am relatively new to New York, so I have not yet gotten involved with all the food banks here, but Upward New York seem to have a terrific mission, and I know colleagues here have been involved in raising our kids in Milwaukee. That was definitely one of the things to go, volunteer at the food bank there, which was Second Harvest. So when Jeff reached out to do this, it sounded like an incredible opportunity to donate to everybody's food banks. I wish we some point wouldn't need this, but we do. So I appreciate what people are donating either in New York or wherever your local food bank is. And thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share screens just so you can see slides. And my game plan for today is, and can somebody just wave at me? Yes, slides working. We have them. We're good. Great. Okay. So game plan today is to run through about 25 minutes or so of talking about social intuition, multimedia effectiveness, sort of what the heck is going on, what the heck is going on in the world, and what skills we might bring to bear. And then I'll unshare and have answer questions and just spend time with this wonderful audience. And I appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to spend time to be together. So that's really just remarkable and lovely. I think the last thing I'll say is that the title has been a long beloved title of sort of spending time with the people that I mostly spend time with, which is law students, also junior sort of up and coming scientists and doctors and engineers. And I realize that the sweet spot of the people I tend to talk to are early career, sort of 25 to 35, trying to figure out their way in the world. And a lot of this is like, who do you want to be when you grow up? If you grow up, right? Like assuming at some point you actually want to adult, and I like that that's a verb now. But assuming you want to adult, so how do you want to come across in the world? And what I've realized is that the work that I should say, at least for me, it's a never ending. It's not like, oh, I've hit adulthood now, and I actually don't need to think about this anymore. We all need to think about this, and sort of with the moving technology, social media norms, and the current situation, which is fraught, is probably a tame word. I think our reflection on sort of how we communicate continues to be more pressing than ever. So with that, let me dive in and just sort of say where we're going to be here. This is already sort of making some assumptions about our goals, what we're trying to accomplish. We can definitely talk in Q&A when you actually don't think the other party's negotiation goal is success in the same way that you define it. And I want to get that. And sort of what we're talking about is in some way working together. We need this rapport and trust in order to communicate, and I'll explain what that is. We use social intuition. This also helps guide us in terms of how we communicate. And even as technology changes and our norms change, we really need this idea of multimedia effectiveness. So I'm going to walk through all of those things, and I'm happy to take some questions along the way, and feel free to put them in the chat. And I can see pretty much David and Jean and Natalie, one of whom I assume will sort of wave at me that there's a question in the chat. And I'll try to pull those down as well. But let me go back for just a second here. So that's what we're gonna be talking about, and I'm happy, as I said, to take a look in the chat as well. And let me just pull that up so I can actually see those. Okay, so the first thing I want us to think about is, even before we get into talking about a negotiation success story, is just to be a little reflective and think about our own skills that we bring to the table. Some of you who sort of know my work, I've spent a lot of time talking about gender in negotiation. I do a lot of research out of anger. It's not always healthy, but it's awfully motivating. And anger continues to be a motivating force these days. So, that's always a good one. And right, gender, like ethnicity, are the things that we can see. If you've had more of a social science approach to negotiation. Some writers often talk about the tip of the iceberg. We only see the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot of stuff going on below. And similarly, I think that's true, obviously, in negotiation. We can see gender and ethnicity, and that may have something to do with how we negotiate and how we were socialized in terms of negotiation. But there's a lot of other things that come to play, and everything from our professional training, uh, those who've been trained now as mediators, right, laying on top of lawyer training or not, other kinds of trainings, that all has to do with our assumptions about how we communicate, mentors, people we've watched over the years, how do they communicate, and are they, email, texting, all of those kinds of things. And of course, to start from the beginning, right, our family also gives us the norms of how we communicate, and whether one disagreed with the adults at dinner tables or not, whether that was encouraged, birth order. I often sort of have my youngest son as an example of, if you were negotiating with him, what you see is that, he's tall and adorable. And that might have something to do with his, negotiation skill set, right? He's a cutie. And right, if he acted in one way or another, right, what you don't know is that, he was raised by lawyers, and I'm sorry, we broke him, right? Like, we would make them sit down and like watch, like, oh my God, it's A Few Good Men, it's the courtroom scene. You've got to watch this. Like, we broke our children pretty early on, right, in which arguing was just for fun. And he's the third of three boys, right? If he didn't like move faster, grab the food faster, talk louder, like he would have been the football, other than like playing football, right? And all of those behaviors definitely have something to do with how he goes through the world. And so for each of us, I'm going to talk about in general, what makes a successful negotiation or how you should communicate. And for each of us, that's going to be different because we're going to have played in our own way of, how this was laid on, what our assumptions were in terms of behavior and any of those things. And so that's really where I want us to be thinking going forward. So with all of that, let's get into what we think a successful negotiation would be. And some of this, right, depending on your literature, start with getting to yes and bargaining for advantage, or anything that I've worked on, right? This all seems pretty familiar to us. We're looking for something that meets our interests better than the alternatives. We want sort of efficient communications. And so again, when we were later talking about our multimedia choices, sort of what's efficient, and how do we determine whether we're happy to send it off into the internet tubes, bye. Or we need to hear right away. In terms of communication, we want something to be integrative, options maximized if possible. Commitment, we want whatever agreement we've come to be carried out. And so what's our follow-up? Again, thinking about how we communicate to make sure that it's carried out. And the relationship to be whether it's created or maintained or improved in one way or another. And it's always I always remind my students that even when you're not reaching an agreement, that relationship can be improved. People get hired from opposing counsel who watches them in action. We know statistically that the second time lawyers meet in a negotiation, whether or not they agreed the first time around, they're more likely to reach a settlement the second time because they know each other, because they have this kind of relationship. And so even as relationships don't necessarily reach settlement, we should be focusing on what that means for the future. There are very, very few one-off negotiations unless you act in a way to make sure that no one ever wants to talk to you again, right? You are in control of whether that's a repeat interaction or whether that's an ongoing one. So that's the kind of thing to think about in these negotiations. And what I want to focus on is what really has, over the years, as more research has been done, becomes the glue of this, right? That rapport, the thing that people work out at the table in order to manage all of those particular elements to make that successful negotiation happen. So when we have some sort of rapport, we're more efficient in exchanging information because we actually don't think it's going to be used against us. We understand that you're going to give me a little, I'm going to give you some information, you're going to give me some information. That rapport helps the listening and respect part of it. And so if I'm respecting the other party, we're more likely to be able to work together. And of course, it helps in de-escalation because we have this rapport, right? If I know something about you, even when something sort of blows up, all right, right? We actually all have family relationships, I'm pretty sure, where we've said something that, maybe that wasn't the smartest thing we've ever said. And that was not, let's say, de-escalating, but rather, fuel to the fire. And because we have this rapport, you're able to walk it back. And you want the same things in professional relationships where, a one-off mistake doesn't mean that that the negotiation or the relationship is not progressing. So really thinking about that rapport, and the rapport specifically ends up in what we're calling trust. Really, how do we build that trust even when the party, we might not trust them. Look, we have many uncles in my family. We have a very large family, and the running joke is like, which uncle would you like to be left with in our family? Because they all have like ridiculously wild personalities in super fun ways. The uncle I would trust to have picked my children up at school might not be the uncle I would trust to actually teach them, like, what are the appropriate values when you're adulting or dating, for example, or anything else, right? We trust in different buckets for different things. And that risk and uncertainty that we have in a negotiation, you might trust your boss to pursue her interests. Great. You might not trust them to pursue your interests. All right. However, but since you can count on them pursuing their interests, that's going to help you figure out how to make a proposal that's in her interests. Right? Because you trust based on the risk, the uncertainty, you've seen that behavior. Trust really is something that helps us predict behavior, good, bad, or otherwise. Trust is the thing that helps us predict. And when we can predict what's going to happen, it lessens our risk, it lessens our uncertainty, it makes it more likely that whatever is happening ends up being complied with. So that rapport and that trust are really the glue of what's happening at the table. And that social intuition is this combination of emotional and social intelligence is a key tool for really understanding this. This is a combination of what we, basically all through the 90s and the early 2000s, Daniel Goleman on emotional intelligence, Malcolm Gladwell and the tipping point, and really this cognitive psychological behavior that actually leads in to our behavior. And we know that, business schools are doing a better job in leadership training and kind of talking about this. Law schools, not as much. And so for the lawyers, right, really thinking about how we bring this in. And obviously, if you've been trained as a mediator, this is a lot of what the layering, the teaching is, right? How are we paying attention to what's going on? How are we developing that emotional intelligence, the social intuition, in order to proceed forward? So I want us to think about the social intuition in 3 different ways, right? And social intuition, I should be really clear, is not the content of the negotiation, right? It's not the what you say in any way. And I know we've had wonderful speakers in this hour before talking about how you prepare and all the other important pieces of knowing what you're talking about. So this is really the how, and it's managing in whatever you're talking about. How are you actually a more effective communicator? There are 3 different buckets that I want us to think about. The first one is nonverbal. Right? We know that depending on different studies, some people have estimated as high as 93% is the highest number I've heard. 93% of all communication is nonverbal. Maybe it's that high, maybe less. It's really, really important. And for all of us as communicators, right? It's everything from how close are you sitting? Again, if you're a mediator on this, you've spent a lot of time thinking about your space. Like, how wide is the table? Not too wide, right? But not so next to each other. And, what are all of the variables for how we are sort of in each other's space. And I will note that all of these elements of social intuition were developed early on, assuming everything is face to face. So I just want to put it out here, right? Proximity does not become an issue on Zoom. We're all the same size, cute little box together, and that has other elements, right, in a negotiation and communication. So proximity is one thing to think about. Eye contact, very important in terms of building trust. We know that if you're looking up at the ceiling, right, that's a signal of perhaps you're thinking or contemplating. American culture is very much, US culture is very much based on the idea that eye contact is necessary and a part of building trust. Physical contact is also really important. Think about how hard it was. I love that this was started over the pandemic. How hard was it for all of us to stop shaking hands, to actually step 6 feet away, right? And the lovely sort of adorable things that we did in the interim, right? Our little elbow bump, or some people would have like ankle, like touch toe ankle kicks or whatever. It all demonstrated this human need for contact in one way or another. So maybe you've gone back to handshaking or not. I'm assuming we're not using it anymore as a search for weapons, right? Which is how it used to be. And yet we're still trying to have some sort of physical contact to develop that connection. So thinking about that. Another element of social intuition is paraverbal, which is the tone and pace that you're using. So even, and we know this whether you're on the phone, on on Zoom or whatever, not face to face, you can hear pace and tone. We can say exactly the same thing, and you can say it in one way that is lovely and positive, and you can say it the same content and say it with the tone of "you're the village idiot," and it will have a completely different meaning. Right? And so tone matters, and reading that for the other party, for ourselves, and then the pace, and particularly noting when pace changes over the course of a negotiation is another signal that you want to be paying attention to. Someone who talks at sort of a whatever their pace is, and then all of a sudden speeds up and starts talking very quickly, maybe they're excited. You've just said something and that makes them really happy, and the pace is that signal. It could also be a sign of nervousness or a sign of bluffing. So I'm going to talk through something that makes me really uncomfortable, and I'm going to talk through it as fast as possible, right? Or conversely, all of a sudden I'm really frustrated and I'm going to slow my talking down. My kids knew very well. If I was talking at a normal pace and sort of blowing up, it was a minor crisis. But if I actually slowed down my talking and talked to them like they were still in 3rd grade, Mom is about to lose her marbles, right? The pace was the signal more than anything, right? So again, in negotiation, we're going to pay attention to that. And the last piece of this is verbal. It's not the content again. It's the ways that emotions and feelings bleed into what we're saying. So look at the humor. Someone who's sort of joking about the day, sort of self-deprecating, very comfortable in the situation. Someone whose humor is a little nasty, pay attention to that. Right? Defensive, worried, trying to set you up in one way or another. They're not going to announce it. Wow, I'm feeling really uncomfortable and defensive in this negotiation. Right? Nobody actually starts that way. Their humor is going to be a signal. Similarly, pay attention to the metaphors, the analogies, the similes, all of those lovely things we learn in 5th grade grammar, all of the things that, again, are not the content, but let you know how they view the situation. So when somebody sits down at the table and says, all right, I am in my armor, I am all set, and the sword is ready to go. Okay, so negotiation is war. That's an interesting frame. Somebody says, we're going to sit down. Let's see if we can move the ball down the field. Okay, it's a sporting event. It's still very competitive, and there are rules. right? We all start this game 0-0. There are boundaries. Most coaches, unless you're certain coaches from the Patriots, seem to follow those rules and we agree with them, right? There are certain boundaries. And somebody else is going to sit down and start talking about, let's build a foundation. What are we, how are we going to bridge our differences, right? Construction, we're working together. So all of these things are particular signals. And for you, as you are trying to work with the other party, you want to be paying attention to social intuition all along the way. What are the things that you are doing? What's your body language? Are you leaning forward, interested, demonstrating respect? Are you like twitching with one of your pens, like, flicking around, which body language is sort of nerve-wracking and distracting? Does it show that you're nervous? Are you making eye contact? What's your pace and tone, right? Step one, know yourself in all of these. Step two is thinking about how you read the other and what signals are they sending. And the third, of course, is trying to bridge that together, right? If they lean forward, you lean forward. If they're slowing down, you're slowing down. Because we know that that bridging builds that human connection in that subconscious way. And that bridging is that rapport and trust and things that we need. Now, it's clear that all of these social intuition cues are affected by culture. If you're teaching a more international audience or a more multicultural workplace, right, where there have been a lot of immigrant populations, that eye contact, for example, is not the same, right? Other cultures have been taught that direct eye contact is threatening or aggressive, or that it's disrespectful when there's a difference in hierarchy, right? A student in some places would never make eye contact with their professor. This would make me sad, based on how I've been acculturated, right? But to them, that would be seen as disrespectful. Similarly, right, how close we stand to one another is a cultural thing, right? So your socialization, culture, gender, family, everything that we talked about at the beginning still has what to say about these social intuition cues. And so even as we're looking, right, my assumptions about how fast it's appropriate to talk are probably regionally based. And I have no doubt accelerated in the last few years, where talking fast is just part of what we do, right? In New York, everything is supposed to be faster. So, right, all of those things to think about. And then what I've said, right, what are the signals you're sending? How are you reading your counterpart? How are you responding? So that's the piece of social intuition, much of which was developed in the last, 25 years, sort of pre-pandemic land, to really focus on face-to-face. What have we been learning in face-to-face negotiations? How do we make these more effective? What are the skills that we can bring to bear? And yet, right now, of course, we're in the online environment in which many more of our communications, if not a majority of our communications, are actually not face-to-face. And how do we still use social intuition in order to be effective? And so the media choices that we have, what we send, how we receive and perceive it, are actually all impacted by our online environment. And I want us to be thinking about this using media richness as our measure. So if we take social intuition, we're going to put it aside for a second. We're now going to look at all of our multimedia choices to understand how they differ and how we might use them wisely. So media richness talks about the idea of a couple different things. One is that the number of channels for social cues. So I've hinted at this already in our social intuition. On the phone, we still have pace and tone. We don't have eye contact. We're not seeing body language, right? The proximity, right? All of that stuff falls away, but we don't completely lose all of the social cues. On the other hand, emailing, texting, we've lost most of those social cues, no matter how many emojis you put, right? There's still some pieces of that that have been lost. And so what are the cues? The verbal, nonverbal, and paraverbal. And the last thing I want us to think about is that degree of interactivity. When we talk about negotiation being efficient and using our time wisely, how we communicate is also a question of efficiency with this interactivity, and to think about what we need. We have all, no doubt, sent emails off into the ether, and we don't hear a response for days, weeks. Did they read it? Did they read it and not like it? Are they ignoring me? Is this a deliberate decision? Right? We don't know. And we start to tell ourselves stories when somebody doesn't get back to me. Wow, they didn't get back to me today. They said they'd get back to me today. Does this mean, what does this mean? The deal's falling apart, the communication, that they must have talked to somebody else, right? We all fill in the blanks. And so realizing that with that interactivity, do we want something that is, again, more interactive, right? We're on Zoom at the same time. We are all here together. If there's a question, we're going to answer it. We're going to have this conversation back and forth versus when is it better to use email? I have a lot of details to share. Let me put it out there. Or there's not a rush. Or here, just to have you percolate on this, and I'm going to circle back. I imagine that some of you have already started thinking about the combination of this. I'm going to text you that I just sent you an email, and the email has lots of information because the text message, if you're like me, your children have already criticized your text messaging skills at some point over your life. Mom, right? Like, why did you write a novel in the text message? I'm like, because you don't read email and you don't realize that the machine in your hands also serves as a telephone. So I thought that was the best way to get information across. Feel free to correct, right? Which they will. And yet, part of, as a sophisticated communicator, right, at work, we actually do want to be thinking about those interactive choices. When do we need to hear, and what are our choices for that? So as we're thinking about it, right, on the left is now all of the variety of choices that we have for communication. And I should say, this is not all, right? You could argue that Slack is somewhere in between an email and a text, and I'm sure somebody's going to be figuring out yet another mode of communication by, within another year or two, right? But this is sort of the professional choices that we have. And I'm keeping text messages up here because even a few years ago, I would have said, oh, nobody's really using text messages at work. I mean, other than saying like, hi, let's meet at noon. And I'll say, I now understand that prosecutors and defense attorneys are absolutely plea bargaining over text. So you're like, it's right. They're sitting in court. You're waiting, maybe the internet's working or not, but you're on your phone. Will you take the deal? Here are the parameters, right? Back and forth. And so it is yet another professional communication choice. On the right column are all of the different things that we need to be thinking about. What is the content, right? Less complicated to me still seems like texting is better for less complicated than an email where you're going to lay things out. Some of us are better on the phone. You want to hear the details. And some of us are more visual. We're visual learners. We need to see it or we need to read it. Right? If you know you're dealing with someone who needs to read and contemplate, you want to send something via email versus talk it through on the phone. Right? And so really playing those choices. Again, the nonverbal cues, what are we missing or getting, our timing that we've talked about, all of those go together in terms of trust and relationship because we know that email and now perhaps texting, but definitely email has been shown to be something that leads to increased distrust. We read into the emails. And so face-to-face, Zooming, we tend to work things out. Like we understand the tone. It makes us less likely to misinterpret things. And again, I'm sure we've all received emails where it sounds like it was actually sent in all caps, right? Or the tone of voice that we are reading it with is that village idiot of like, oh, you think I'm the village idiot. Thanks for that, right? Okay. In part, it's because we're not hearing the tone because we don't have what's going on. And so thinking about our choices in terms of building trust and relationship and potentially mixing and matching these as well. Studies, even pre-pandemic, showed that when you got on the phone first and had a back and forth, then went on to email, that was better for building rapport. And my guess, my hypothesis on this is that now you were reading the email with that person's voice. You knew the tone, you knew the pace, And that allowed you to read the email in a way that was more positive. So again, these are all of the choices that we have in our mind with all of the elements that we've got to be thinking about. And now we've got to put it all together, which is no small feat, right? Pandemic, remote communication, and what's happening today in our country have absolutely upended traditional thinking about connection and rapport and how we want to be communicating. And so to the extent that you thought you had an idea of what was going on, right? Oh, I mean, literally this week, I'm going to make some comment on television or some comment on social media. Choose wisely, right? There are ramifications in ways that the polarization, the situation that we are in and have been in for years at this point, we want to be making wise choices. Whatever those choices are, my argument always is I want you to be proactive and effective. And if you want to be making those, whatever the statements are, awesome, fabulous. Don't do anything by accident. Know that you should be making the wise choices. So, couple last thoughts here. Ideas for multimedia effectiveness. For emails, and I've been doing this for years, right? When we reply on an email, write the content first. That's the thing in your brain. And then go back, add the salutation. Wow, Jean, it was so great to see you on Zoom last week. I really enjoyed our interaction. Here's the follow-up for the questions that you asked. Talk soon, Andrea, right? Where I would have just had the follow-up at the beginning. We all should know better at this point. Add the salutation, add that emotion, schmooze, use the header to actually say what you mean is going on as opposed to forward, respond, whatever it is, right? Use emails wisely. And note that when we've chosen a different mode of communication, an email is terrific for follow-up. So really thinking about the benefits of that email. Texting, quick, casual, signaling. This email just came through. I just tried to reach you on the phone to talk this through. I think it would be better if we meet on Zoom. I have some questions. Let me know when you're available, right? It's this very quick sort of casual scheduling kind of thing that can be an excellent complement to the other ways and can also reduce, again, that risk, that uncertainty, that unpredictability that relationships have. So, rather than sending that email off into Never Never Land, you're finding out when they're going to be available. Phone, still great for getting to know, taking advantage of that paraverbal, that tone and pace. And look, for all of us who have been on back-to-back Zoom meetings, I love now somebody who's like, I actually know what you look like. We're good. Like, get on the phone and, go take a walk up and down the block, walk around your house, the office, wherever you're working from, and not sit on video, because we also know that back-to-back Zoom absolutely leads to exhaustion. Right? It is just much more tiring to be on video all the time. So again, as we are choosing these, choose wisely. Do you need the video? In long-standing relationships, maybe not. Right? Feel free to turn it off and focus on what they're saying rather than how we're looking on any given day. Face-to-face, obviously, our last choice is still the gold standard. And for negotiations, businesses, mediators, for all of us to be considering, when is it still worth it? When, get everybody in the room. If it's at an office, walk down the hallway. That's actually lovely. And have that communication. Right, sometimes we have to sort of measure the economics of it and things like that. So again, thinking when things are worth it and how we invest. So to wrap it all up, recognize that we need social intuition in all of our interactions. We want to be wise in how we communicate, when we communicate, and where we're communicating. So all of the choices that we're making among these modes of communication, it is social intuition, right? It is that emotional and social intelligence that helps us decide, oh, that didn't sound so good. Let me back it up and let me follow up with an email. Let me get on the phone on that. Let me fly and go see that person, right? When do we need to actually invest? It is that social intuition that helps us to really figure this out. And that, of course, is the result, that multimedia approach to effectiveness, that we have these choices, we want to be using them wisely, and emotional and social intelligence is not just reserved for those face-to-face communications. It should be turned on all the time to help us really manage what has increasingly become a more difficult, a more polarized world, so that we can continue to make effective choices. So with that, I'm going to questions. Thank you. All of the things. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and happily answer everybody's questions. It's lovely to see so many familiar and new faces. So
Andrea, this is Michael. I have a question for you.
sure.
So these concepts are all really important, and I see their applicability in particular for one-on-one communications. As a mediator who is typically involved in litigated disputes, there's really 5 people involved. There's me as a mediator, then there's a lawyer and a client on one side, a lawyer and a client on the other side. And so I'm curious as to your view on how one applies these very important ideas in such a multi-dimensional environment.
Right. So, and I guess, Michael, are you talking about sort of the in-person when you have all 5, or sort of also just managing the communications?
Well,
when you're not
I'm
together?
talking about primarily in a Zoom situation, because most mediations today occur over Zoom.
Right.
And inevitably, maybe you're in a caucus and there's 3 people, you plus a lawyer plus a client.
Right.
Maybe there's a joint session, but in any event, it's not a one-on-one. It
Right.
may be a 1-on-2, it may be a 1-on-4.
Right.
And
Right.
so the question is, you have different feedback. The lawyer may be giving you one set of impressions, verbal, nonverbal. The client may be giving you another set of impressions, verbal and nonverbal. That can be happening simultaneously on both sides and can be happening just with one side. But in any event, what you don't have is a one-on-one communication where all of these concepts can be easily put into practice. I'm curious in
Right.
this
No, it's not easy. And I think you're pointing out exactly the challenge. Like, paying attention to all of this is exhausting, because even on the screen, right? Like, some of you, I can see your hands, and, Michael, I can actually see your hands, right? Other people, their hands are not. I mean, for me, like, half the time I'm talking with my hands like this, and you can sort of see them, right? If I'm one of those people, if you tie my hands behind my back, I don't think I could talk. Right. So we're sort of you're watching all of that, and to watch multiple screens of, is somebody leaning in, leaning back? Are they sort of, when people turn their camera off, what's going on? I imagine you might have rules about cameras on and those kinds of things to think about. I think that's exactly the point. Like, on the one hand, you're really not worried about proximity. You're not worried about eye contact. You probably remember early technology when we would be attempting to make eye contact on video screens. And if you were like an early, like, WebEx, Cisco, like, you'd be looking off in the distance, and it was bad eye contact. So some of this has actually become easier for us on video conferencing. But that pace and tone, for you to be able to, have even multiple screens or a big screen where you're sort of hearing what's going on, making a note to yourself, watching even the, the leaning in, leaning out. And look, also, again, it depends. I'm also always curious about people's backgrounds, right? Pay attention to the background, right? That's a little bit of a schmooze and building connection, right? If it's blurred out, or they have sort of the standard company logo behind them, sort of interesting. I don't know if you remember, during the pandemic, there was at least some conversation on the internet about who had the best, background over the pandemic, for like who had the best books and things like that. I've sometimes done that as sort of a schmoozy build connection of, like, show me something that's in your background. Like, oh, can you grab that picture, that whatever, like, where are you working from? And, like, simulating as if you were in somebody's office, right? To sort of build that connection. I still tell students, like, if you walk into a partner's office and there's a giant fish on the wall, ask about the fish. It's clearly important to them. Like, find out what's going on there, because that's right. And so that's the kind of thing where, on the one hand, I think video conferencing has made some of these things easier, and on the other hand, you're right that that's a lot to pay attention to with 5 people, whether you're in person or on a screen. And if you can pay attention and note what's happening, right? If the client is completely silent, I mean, you know this anyway. If the client's completely silent the entire time, like, bring them in, ask, try to see what's going on. Not some that doesn't change. It's
Right.
still important.
Thank you.
There's just more of it.
Andrea, there's a question in the chat that that was interesting. I wanted to use maybe as a launching point for a broader question. David Geffen asked, would you have the mediator recommend that attorneys meet in person before the mediation? And one of the things that really struck me during your talk, which was fantastic, by the way, and thank you, is obviously, you mentioned that when there's a previous relationship, there's a higher chance of success for a settlement in the future. And I come from a deal-making background where I can appreciate that. But oftentimes in mediations, I find that these lawyers have barely had any interaction with each other. They barely have spoken. They probably have never met in person. Maybe it's very early in a case and the case isn't really ripe for settlement, and there's some additional discovery or things that have to happen. And I was just dealing with this a couple of days ago where I wondered to myself, maybe I should put these lawyers in the room together so I can at least introduce them. And I wondered if you had some thoughts about how we can maybe work in that context, especially in the context of Zoom. Are there taboos that you can help us break? Because often as mediator, you feel like I'm not supposed to do that. They don't, maybe what happens if it goes wrong? Can you speak to your thoughts on that?
I mean, look, what happens if it goes wrong is, right? That's in the back of all of our heads of, like,
Yeah.
what if I say this in class and everybody's like, that's the dumbest thing, right? Like, you have a great sense of, I'm looking at least, the people who are on this, like, people have been doing this for a very long time. If you have a sense, right, the mediator's in charge of the process. So make it explicit and say, look, I'm, I'm in my job here is to help facilitate a process that works for everybody. And what I have found is that when I get people together, it's actually helpful for there to at least be some relationship building. And so I'm wondering, I'd like to meet each of you individually anyway. Maybe we could just do something, all 3 of us, so that you guys get to meet each other beforehand as well. And in one of that, I will, on a completely different tangent, I'll come back and talk about this another time. One of my favorite studies ever, we went to France and got students drunk and then had them negotiate. Super fun. I don't think I could do it in the United States, although I'm still looking around. If there's an IRB, at your university that would let me drink with your students, please bring me. So this was in Burgundy, and we got them wine and coffee and water, and then they were in the classroom or in a lounge. The students that had either wine or coffee together were more likely to want to work together, were more persistent and patient in the negotiation, had a better integrative relationship. It didn't matter what it was actually that we are sharing the same liquid. And again, not surprisingly, out of a classroom and instead at the wine bar lounge, which I recommend at the Burgundy School of Business. Also, more relaxed, more willing to stay on and do creative problems afterwards. We had them doing all sorts of fun things. There's something there. We are human. So meet at the coffee place down the block and get a cup of coffee and just, if everybody, like, if people are not in the same place, they're not in the same place. You've got to do this on Zoom. But we all did this during pandemic, like, have the Zoom coffee hour and, everybody get a cup of coffee. What's your favorite coffee? Are you drinking coffee or tea? Are you, just meet. You have a sense of this. Trust your sense. It doesn't disappear because we're on Zoom.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I'll ask another question. I also found it very interesting in the beginning of your talk when you were speaking about sort of, working with students and the ways that they tend to communicate these days. And I wondered, this comes up a lot, for example, in a professional context when you're maybe running a group and you have young lawyers who are going to call over and make a deal with someone else, or more typically just want to send an email. And I wonder what your thoughts are on how to meet students or young people where they are today in terms of what how they've been socialized to communicate. It's very different, I think, from folks who are at a different end of the spectrum potentially. And it comes up in mediations, for example, when maybe dealing with younger parties and you see what the history of communications have been that have led to a dispute or how they interact with their managers. What are your thoughts on how we can effectively navigate those types of issues between generations?
Right. And it's not always generational, right? We're going to have different tendencies. My former dean and I are almost we're within years. We're the same generation. And what I realized early on is he could say no to me really easily over email. So I stopped asking for things over email. Right? Go face to face. Like he was conflict avoidant in person. So guess what? Right? Like all of us have different inclinations, comfort levels on any of these choices. Part of what I will tell students is you're going to be negotiating with people who have different comfort levels. If you want to be effective, you're going to do it their way. Right? So I'd ask my dean in person for things, but I'd follow up in email because he loved him in email, like bullet points, outline, here's the follow up, like that made his day. So the follow up communication was always in exactly the way that he wanted, right? As opposed to the way that I wanted. I think it's again, sort of that 3-step process of first know yourself. What's your default? For any of us, when you get up in the morning, are you checking if there are calls? Are you checking their texts? Are you checking emails? Like, how are you operating in the world of communication? And my guess is that varies, right? Am I checking first on text because my children will not call? So first it is texting, right? Like everybody, has anything happened overnight that I need to know about, right? Then it's going to be on email for work. Then it might be WhatsApp on a couple different international things, right? We all have that. So first of all, what are our comfortable modes? And I still at heart am face to face, like, happy to do that. I think that's more effective. That's not everybody's, right? Second, what's theirs? And for any time that we're going to be interacting with somebody more than once, it is worth your time to figure out their mode of communication. Are they happy to talk on the phone, right? God bless my grandmother back in the day, happy phone. And you know what? I could do like 25 different things. And I would schedule the lovely phone calls of like, all right, I'm letting my grandmother go and I'm going to like fold laundry and clean the kitchen and do whatever it was because I'm not going to try to teach her some other mode of communication. Like meet them where they are and figure out how you're managing that. So if you're working, I would tell my law students, if you're working with a partner who you notice the emails go off into Never Never Land, like, did you try calling? They're like, wait, what? And I'm like, call, here's a phone, figure it out. But I mean, part of this is you have choices and there's no reason to hobble yourself by eliminating a mode of communication that could work effectively. And so what have you done to try to make that communication more effective? And similarly, right, on the other end, for those of us who are, if somebody, and I will do this explicitly, like I've had people like, DM me and I'm like, yeah, that's not happening. Or even on LinkedIn, we'll start like long conversations. And I'm like, I only check LinkedIn at the end of the day. Here's my email at work. Please feel free to use it. Because if you want me to actually talk to you in the middle of the day, you're not asking me a question on LinkedIn. Like I do not live there. And I just want to be really blunt about when I'm checking social media, even if it's sort of useful, professional social media, right? Like I'm not doing that. So I think it's again, that same responsibility if you're in a relationship and that relationship operates both ways. and everybody, we're unwise at whatever comfort level we are, not to kind of try to meet, people where they are. And similarly for our law students and everybody else at the younger spectrum, to understand, like, use all of the modes, even if you're not comfortable with them.
I think that's a really important point, because to one degree you feel like maybe I'm projecting what's comfortable for me onto someone, thinking that's going to be more effective, right? But at the same time, it may not be comfortable for them. Then the question is, are you being avoidant in your form of communication because it's not comfortable? And then that doesn't become effective.
Right. Oh, and by the way, avoidant, yes, absolutely. Like, we all avoid stuff that's uncomfortable, and that's another issue completely. But I think I've definitely seen younger people sort of say, like, well, I sent an email and they didn't respond, so we're done. And I'm like, no, actually, no. You're going to call, you're going to walk down the block, you're going to send another email, and it's going to be very gracious, something to the effect of just moving this to the top of your queue, because we've all lost emails. And yes, maybe that's deliberate sometimes. And sometimes it's, I got completely swamped, I'm so sorry, right? I read it, I forgot to mark it unread, to move it to the queue of things to do, right? Give everybody grace in communication as well, and help them communicate better with you.
We got a couple more minutes. I don't know if anyone has any additional questions, or if you have any final thoughts that you wanted to wrap up. I was just going to say, as a mediator, all these are, these tools and these forms of communication, they're part of the things in the tool bag when you're communicating with opposing counsel as well. And there's definitely situations where you want to give them space to wiggle, or you want to be more confrontational, or it has to be on the phone. So it's all very extraordinarily helpful insights into how to manage these communications, especially with the verbal, the nonverbal, the paraverbal. I thought it was so fascinating.
Right. Oh, this is good. Tim saying, wait, I'm learning to warn people by text. Right. Exactly. Right. Like, I'm about to call you. Is this okay? Does this work as a time? Right. This whole, that texting to flag. I think all of these, I think, are, well, thanks, Sherry. I think there are just really good choices, and we want, just as we've all been trained, we want to be as effective with these choices as we can.
Well, and if you look up one more in the chat there from Mateo, he has an interesting question for you, Andrea. New generations appear to prefer text to phone calls as main ways to communicate, allegedly because texts allow to prepare and ponder, while phone calls, I find this interesting, may prompt some stress,
Right.
real live time, but then he goes on, any expectation about how this may affect future social intuition or professional negotiation?
Right. No, I think it's right. And they're very much the signaling that phones are, I mean, we go back to the media richness, it's immediate interactivity. And that seems almost like, wait, you're in my space. How, and it's, this is a generational thing, and I'll end with this last story. So my mom is so well trained to pick up the phone when any of her children call, that she will pick up the phone to tell us she can't talk. And I'm just like, I adore you. Stop picking up the phone. Like, here's this thing called voicemail. Like, let it go to voicemail and then call me back. Why are you picking up the phone to tell me you can't talk, right? It's hilarious. And I think generationally, and this is what Mateo's looking, right? She's been trained one way. It would be rude not to pick up the phone. And my kids are, it's rude to call me. How do you know where I am and what I'm in the middle of? And I'm like, then don't pick up. I don't understand, right? And that's all in the personal managing your communication. But those are the kids that we're now working with, right? And so if you're trying to talk about something in a professional manner, right, you might email to say, I'd like to get on the phone to talk this through. It's pretty complicated. Can we set a time on Zoom? If you have their cell phone already, then that is the equivalent of, let me, I'd like to talk this through and get this sort of warning thing, because there's, right, everybody's sort of expectation socialization of what gives you this space. And so again, it's not a right or wrong. None of these are always right, always wrong. It really is just that developing wisdom and sort of this grace about other people's choices and preferences so that we're more effective. Like, don't insist on talking to somebody on the phone if they're just terrible at it. Right. And similarly, right, any of these are choices that we should be making wisely. So,
Well, thank you, Andrea, for such an insightful and helpful presentation. You've given us all so much to think about and so many really
thank you.
useful tools and strategies to try and be more effective in our practices as well. To our entire audience, thank you for attending today. Please remember to let Natalie know the donations that you may have made so we can keep track. And again, Andrea, thank you so much. We really appreciate your involvement and support.
Pleasure, Dave.
And with that, we are concluded. We'll see everyone next week.